All right. So I think we can
Yeah.
share the screen.
Okay.
So let us get started.
Okay.
Um, all of you can see the screen, right?
I can see it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fine. So
Everybody can see it.
we can get started. So I've also started the recording. So
Yes.
Kiranji, please.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So we have been talking about in the last few sessions how the uh, Muslim invasions from 636 AD to 1206 AD were being resisted with great heroism by the Hindus. And this is a point which is one of the purposes of this book, to highlight the Hindu heroism in the face of invasions. However, today we have to learn some lessons from our final loss, because at the end of 570 years of resistance, the Muslim invaders did succeed in entering into Delhi and then gradually expanding their rule over the most of India. So, what I propose, Arnabji, is first to just go through all the slides. I will explain what I'm planning to do, and so since we are familiarizing ourselves with the books of Voice of India, I'm following the subheadings of the chapter itself. So the first thing we will do is a brief overview. Can we have the first slide, Arnabji? Yeah, this is just a map of India at that time. Don't focus too much on the arrows. We have been through all that before. Next, please, Arnabji. Yeah. So we will talk about why we particularly focus on Islamic invaders and what differentiates Islamic invaders from other invaders. And then we will go into the uh, chapter itself. And the chapter starts with the first heading is Islamic imperialism has revived. And then the next subsection is Hindus today are more confused than ever before. And then there is a small section which he entitles Adding Insult to Injury. And then he goes into the analysis and he says mistaken analysis by people regarding the causes of our defeats. And then he puts forward his own views for the real causes of Hindu defeats. And he mentions at the end uh, what he calls the sappers and miners of Islamic imperialism and the brotherhood of bandits. After this, he talks about that. And that is the, yes. And then the brotherhood band. Now, that is the whole of this particular chapter. I have found that it will be useful for us to also talk about Sitaram Goelji's own views on this subject. Although he is talking about Dr. Mishra's analysis uh, as though he agrees with everything, he doesn't actually agree with all the points that Dr. Mishra makes. So I have taken the chapter of his analysis from the other book, Islamic Imperialism in India, in which he gives these four causes: spiritual, cultural, mental, and the policies that were not pursued. So, this is what we are going to discuss today, and we'll go back to the beginning. And as usual, we hope that we will have a very vibrant interaction at the end, and we will have time for that. So, first of all, this 570 years of resistance has been divided into 50-year uh, uh, periods of time, just to quantify the number of attempts that had been made. So from 2000 and from 636 to 650, a period of 14 years, there were 5 attempts. And then from 1200 to 1206, at the end, in a period of 6 years, there were 9 attempts. And in between, every 50-year period, there was a minimum of 5 to 20 attempts. So this gives us an idea of how many attempts had been thwarted and the scale of the resistance that had been put up. So now I will talk a bit about why we particularly focus on Islamic invasions and what differentiates it from the other invasions. So you see, invasions, we are accustomed to invasions from the 3rd century BC. There were so many, there were the Scythians, the Huns, and so on. But all of these were military adventures where there was never any question of questioning what we stood for, whether validating or invalidating what we stood for. Now, to understand this better, you can take the example of the Mongols themselves. The pre-Islamic Mongols had a huge empire, but they did not leave any footprint at the end of it. When they invaded China, they became Sinicized, they went into Europe, they just had an empire. But from the moment they got Islamized, there is no longer any differentiation between Arabic, Turkic, and Mongol invaders. All of them become Islamic invaders. And Islam functions as a kind of a transnational political ideology of aggression, which uses terror as a means to convert all others to their ideology. So this is something totally different. For the first time, we come across invaders who invalidate what we stand for, who tell us that we are kafirs, and they want to not only invade us, but they want to erase our civilization and absorb us into their ideology. So please don't worry about the slides, Mahesh ji. The slides are used just as a maybe Arnab ji, maybe we can just remove the slides for the moment, because I just ran through the slides to begin with, just to give a focus to the presentation.
Sure, sir. Thank you. I thought I missed something.
No, not at all, not at all. So there is no text to read in today's presentation. So I was just mentioning what differentiates Islamic invasions from the other invasions that occurred, and the main thing is the ideology. This Abrahamic ideology makes a vertical divide between believers and unbelievers, Darul Islam and Darul Harb, and they sanction the use of violence and terror to force everybody to accept them. And their scripture validates the use of brutality and unspeakable cruelty on those whom they conquer. So this is something which is totally different as compared to the normal thing. So there should never be a false equivalence between what we are in Sanatana Dharma and what Islam stands for. Islam is a political ideology which uses terror as a means and which tries to enforce uniformity over the whole world through force. Sanatana Dharma is best understood as a, you know, as a repository of knowledge systems which celebrates diversity. So that is as far as the introduction goes. Now, the first section, uh, Dr. Mishra says that, uh, this has now revived. He's talking about the 80s or 90s. It is much more relevant now. And the fact is that if you look at India today, it is no different from this period of 570 years where there were constant onslaughts against us from the Islamic invaders. Now this onslaught is from within. And what we have as our nation, the constitution, is itself a kind of an Abrahamic construct, because the secularism itself is not a dharmic construct. So in many ways, I would personally say that we are much worse off today than at that time, because at that time at least they were able to put up a heroic resistance. Today we are behaving in a very cowardly manner. So before we proceed, I want to just bring two images, to which I will come back later. And the idea is to just make a certain concept vivid in our minds. The first is that, our whole depiction of history is invasion centric. We are basically discussing about one invasion after the other. So it is something like if you were to imagine an extraterrestrial person. I just want you to make this exercise. Imagine that somebody has come from some distant galaxy, and he has been told to try to make a report about life on this earth. It's just an example. And let us imagine that this person lands somewhere, and all he sees is a few cows grazing on some grass. Now, if he were to take just this picture and present it back to his galaxy, saying that this is what happens on the earth, it would not really make any meaning. So to understand what is happening there, you need to see its interrelationships with the rest of the solar system. I'm just giving this as an example to make a particular concept vivid. So what is happening here is that energy is coming in the form of photons from the sun. It is enabling the photosynthesis in the grass. Oxygen is being liberated, which is being breathed by the animals, and the carbon dioxide is being used along with water to form carbohydrates, which is being eaten by the cow and being converted inside the cow to cow protein. So this is what is known as a carbon cycle. So you're looking at an image, but the more you deepen your gaze, you begin to see the interconnection between the sun and the grass and the cow and the rest of the solar system. Okay, so that is one image. We will come back to it at the end when we talk of Sitaram Goel's analysis. The second image is when we go back in time. Now, in 1930, when Gandhi used to address his prayer meetings in the evening, he used to talk about we 300 million Indians. That was the population of people living on the entire subcontinent, which includes today's Pakistan and Bangladesh and even Burma in those days. So what happens in 100 years is that the population comes down drastically. So human population comes down, animal population goes up. So as we go back in time, you find that the distance between one human habitation to another human habitation, the intervening distance is full of forests and animals. Okay, so it is very difficult for an outsider, because there are no highways. It's very difficult for an outsider to know how to navigate this area unless they have some inside information. Okay, so we will leave these two images and go back to the story being narrated by Dr. Mishra. So he has mentioned that Islamic imperialism has revived, and it is fueled by petrodollars, and we are psychologically in a similar state of conflict that existed between 636 to 1207. He says that today we are more confused than ever before. That is the next subsection of this chapter. So after we lost, there was another period of 550 years when we put up a resistance, and eventually starting with Vijayanagar Empire, and then Shivaji Maharaj, and then the Rajputs and Banda Sahib in Punjab, we managed to overthrow the Mughal dynasty in the middle of the 18th century. But at the end of it, our losses were huge. First loss, he says, in terms of territory, we have already lost Afghanistan, Seistan, and Makran. Secondly, in terms of population, Bill Durant calls the Islamic conquest of India probably the bloodiest story in the history of humanity. It is never been quantified. Not only random killings, but taking of slaves and so on and so forth. The third thing is social integration. So the whole impact of the Islamic conquest, because prior to that, we had our conflicts, but we obeyed certain rules. At the end of the battle, there was no question of continuing the battle against non-combatants. Battle was all symmetrical warfare between man and man. You don't go into the civilian population and capture the women and the children and sell them as slaves in Central Asia. So all these practices over 550 years that led to a tremendous disruption of the social fabric of the nation. And then fourthly, he talks about the spiritual corruption. Spiritual corruption because of confusion, tremendous confusion. The false equivalence between Islam, which is a political ideology, and Sanatana Dharma, which is, as I said, a repository of knowledge systems. The next section of Dr. Mishra's chapter talks about adding insult to injury. So here he talks about the British, Muslim and Marxist attempts to whitewash this whole period of Muslim rule over India. And Sitaram Goelji doesn't even bother to take up all the different arguments, but he mentions only one as an example. One of the Muslim historians, who is probably also a Marxist, M. Habib, he claims that it was not the Ghurian conquest, was not really a conquest. It was more or less like an opinion poll. It was a turnover of public opinion, a sudden turnover, which had a choice between the Sharia and the Smriti, and they chose the Sharia. So, and this Habib has been hailed as a doyen of secular historians. So this is the way that history has been distorted. Now, Dr. Mishra talks about the mistaken analysis of other historians regarding the reasons for our defeat. So he rejects most of the causes given by the prevailing historians because they talk about the defects of the political system of and the disunity among Hindu states. He said that these type of conflicts, they occur everywhere. They are not particular to Indian soil. So internecine conflicts he does not accept as the reason for the collapse of the Indians, because he says in spite of that disunity, not a single Indian state took the side of the invaders against India. Then he says that Indians never lacked a national consciousness. Now, this is where Sitaram Goyalji differs. I will come to that at the end. And Dr. Mishra mentions at least 4 confederacies, and he talks about them from accounts of medieval Muslim historians. There were at least 4 confederacies formed by Hindu states. So that is a proof that it was not only a story of disunity, there was also attempts at unity. So now we come to what are the real causes of Hindu defeats as per Dr. Mishra. And the first cause, he says, is the lack of a forward policy, by which he means that the spirit of aggression was missing. This is, of course, a fact. Now, our kings, they fought battles in an open battlefield. They followed certain rules. It was more or less like a kabaddi match. Somebody enters and then you repel the invaders. The only difference is that we never invaded their side. So what Dr. Mishra says is that had we given them back in their own coin, instead of just having this fortress mentality, our response to repeated invasions was to build more and more fortresses. So eventually, in the face of repeated invasions, your defenses will give way someday or the other. And he says that this spirit of aggression could not be taken forward mainly because we did not have a centralized government which could decide what is to be done. And he says that, this example of, the Vijayanagar Empire, Shivaji, and later on the Khalsas, they all show the value of a centralized form of government in order to repel these invasions. Then he talks about the technical part of it, the military organization of the Rajputs. And he says that they were a bit inferior compared to the Muslims. And of course, one of the reasons for that is that we never had a standing army. We depended on levies, which were formed in times of emergency. So the standing army was very limited in number. And the rest of the time, they just had some kind of a mob to add on to that army. And the fourth point, which he says, which is mentioned by many historians, is that the Arabic and Turkoman horses were better. And this is, of course, repeatedly mentioned because in the early days we had elephants, and elephants, when they get wounded, they don't have any sense of direction. They can even, in their anguish, they can even turn against their own side. They are slow. They don't have the speed of the horses. And the problem we had is that our climate in India was not suitable for rearing these type of horses. And we had to, it was only in the time of Shivaji that a certain kind of horse they were able to breed, which could withstand the climate in India. But this is mentioned by many historians. So then he talks about another factor. He calls it the sappers and miners of Islamic imperialism. Now, this is that Udar Charitra of Indians, that we allowed the Sufis to enter, we allowed Arab merchants to enter, along with these invasions that were being attempted. And these people were actually working as fifth columns within India. This famous Sufi Moinuddin Chishti, uh, they are supposed to have actually sent messages for the invaders to come and kill the Kafirs and establish Islamic rule. And now I come back to the image that I had of going back in time. So many of these traders, they also used to give information regarding the paths to be taken to negotiate the terrain and all that. The last point he mentions is the Brotherhood of Bandits. And that is something that, in addition to the Islamic cause for which they were fighting, it was also a fact that the plunder was being shared between the soldiers and the generals. So that was another incentive for the Islamic invaders. Now, that is as far as this particular chapter goes. We have covered whatever Dr. Mishra has said. But I was curious to see what was Sitaram Goelji's own ideas about it. And from his book, The Story of Islamic Imperialism in India, I found that he goes a little bit further than Dr. Mishra. And first of all, he says that the usual Marxist historians, Marxism has a problem with the class structure. So they always talk about castes. And their conception of Hinduism is the caste system, and their answer to it is to destroy Hinduism. So Marxist historians always talk about the caste system and the rigidity of the caste system, which was the cause of failure. But Sitaram Goelji says at the very beginning that the caste system became rigid only as a result of invasions. Prior to that, it was quite fluid. Secondly, he talks about the failure of the art of warfare. So here he agrees with Dr. Mishra. He says, yes, as far as the spirit of sacrifice and the valor is concerned, they were no less, or they were more than a match for the invaders. But when it came to certain technical superiority in the art of warfare, strategies, tactics, and other things, he says that we had fallen behind the times in these respects. So there he agrees with Dr. Mishra. Political failure is a failure of the state system. So here he says that initially the small deshas like the Shahiyas, the Chauhans, the Chandelas, the Gahadwads, the Chaulukyas, they were all far superior to the Islamic invaders in terms of financial means and resources. But they did not mobilize themselves together to keep them out. And he says that this is because of the lack of a central system. Ours was a very democratic and decentralized system. And if there had been a centralized system, Chanakya had prescribed 10% of the tax to be paid to the government and all that. So that could have helped us to keep a standing army. So actually, we didn't have a standing army. Our army was very small in numbers as far as the regular army goes. And whenever invasions happened, we used to, get people who were more of a nature of a mob. They did not have the fighting capability of a standing army. So now we come to what he talks about as the foremost failure of which led to our downfall. And this is where I come back to our image of the cow grazing on the grass. So if we look at history from the point of invasions alone, we do not get the whole picture. We need to tell the history as Indians, and there is a certain milieu, a certain context in which events happen. And we had mentioned at the beginning that our civilization is dharmic at its root. But I had also mentioned that it comes from the Vedas, and there is a reason that I had specifically mentioned the Vedas. Because there has been, in the evolution of time, there has been a certain deviation in our you know, general understanding of spirituality. In the time of Vedas, there was no conflict between spirituality and materialism. Everything was accepted as part of, as legitimate. You know, so you can differentiate between what is known as horizontal spirituality, or if I use modern language, affirmative spirituality, which is life accepting, and what later on became a vertical spirituality, a kind of need to escape from life itself. Now, the thing is that there is a symbiotic relationship between society and the individual. The society nurtures the individual, and in turn, the individual has certain responsibilities to discharge towards the society. And if this is broken, then the whole vitality of the society declines. So, here I would actually suggest a project to people like Aditya, who is very knowledgeable. And I bring back that image of the cow and all the interrelationships. So what we need to do is to see, apart from the invasions and other things that happened, the entire milieu, the entire context and cultural situation across India at that point in time. So, for example, Sitaram Goyalji does not mention anybody by name, but what he says is that if you see the spiritual literature that was coming out at that time, there is a lack of interest in life. There is a turning away of life. And, if I will give you one example. Now, if Gandhi, for example, if he says that our ideal is simple living and high thinking. Now, that is all right for an individual. An individual can say, I am going to have a very simple life and I am going to have very high thinking. But can you make that an ideal for a nation? That will lead to confusion. The ideal before every nation should always be Aishwarya, prosperity. You know, so this is where an individual ideal can sometimes confuse the entire population. So even in the Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna talks about different reasons why he doesn't want to fight, one of the things Krishna mentions is that people always follow the leaders. So if leaders behave in a way contrary to dharma, the whole society gets confused. Now, the Sanatana Dharma is not a rigid system. It has got every possibility for everyone. So there are people who may feel that they do not have any interest in life, and their purpose in life is to get out of life. This is known as vertical spirituality. Vertical spirituality means you have to get out of the gravitational attraction of the earth. So you have to generate through tapas a kind of escape velocity where you blast off into outer space or inner space, and then you are no longer concerned with the rest of what is going on here. Now, this kind of a life rejecting spirituality, it started taking hold of the national consciousness particularly with the time of Shankaracharya. Now note the birth of Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya was born in 788 AD, right in the middle of these Islamic invasions. And those who know the life of Shankaracharya, what an impact he had on the whole national consciousness. He lived only for 32 years. And within these 32 years, he walked on foot, uniting the length and breadth of the country. But what he taught was Advaita Vedanta. And his message started getting amplified gradually. So this is something that historians need to look at. This is something that I don't believe that historians have seen. And this is where Sitaram Goelji puts his finger on it. He says our foremost failure was a spiritual failure. Spirituality in the sense of the Vedas, ihaiva santah, it is here, it is life accepting. Spirituality should make life more beautiful, not less beautiful. If you take the smallest aspect of Indian life, you take, for example, what in Hindi they call the chonk, which goes into the preparation of a food at the end. In Karnataka, they call it voggarne. In Tamil, they call it talikride. So tempering, they call it in English. So even a simple thing like that, for it to evolve, it has taken generations of mothers who have lived life with great love, with great attention to evolve these small things. All our accomplishments in all our fields, whether it is music or sculpture or the sciences or the literature, would not have been possible if our foundation is life rejecting. This is a very, very important point, and we have to really understand this point. Sitaram Goelji says that this is our main fault because Indians get their energy from illumination. First, there is an inner illumination, and then you either become a poet or you become a warrior or you become a creator of any level. And if your inspiration is rejecting life, then that is where you end up. You end up with a Muslim conquest of India. And today, let me tell you, today, whole of India is Advaitic. We believe that Sanatana Dharma is Advaita Vedanta. I am not against anybody. And let me tell you that Acharya Shankara, in my estimate, is probably the greatest intellect to have ever walked on this earth. There is no question about it. In his brief lifetime of 32 years, what he achieved, building up the thing is unparalleled. However, his message of the rejection of life, it got amplified and amplified and amplified to the extent that finally today we are totally confused. The Ramakrishna ashram wants to say that they are not Hindus, they are a separate religion. They say that Islam is also I mean, I'm a great bhakta of Bhagwan Ramakrishna and all the Swamis, but I have always had a problem with this equation that they make between Islam and Sanatana Dharma, and they legitimize that Islam is also a way of achieving spiritual fulfillment. So my point is that one of the projects that we can take up as Voice of India Academy is to actually make a list of the different spiritual movements. Now, at the time of these Islamic invasions, the Gorakh movement got established all over India and Nepal, with Gorakhpur as its headquarters. So that was the Hatha Yoga movement, which popularized Hatha Yoga. Then you have Surdas and the Bhakti movement. You have Kabir and Meera and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Arnab and Abhijit will tell us all about it. So it would be extremely interesting for us to actually map out a timeline of all these movements across India and then tie it up with our situation during those times. That is just a thought that I had, and I propose it to those of you who may be interested. I can always help in the editing part of it. Okay, so that was the first, the most important failure is a spiritual failure. The second failure, he says, is cultural. He says the essential unity, integrity, and sanctity of Bharatvarsha, which is there in the Ramayana, Puranas, and Dharma Shastras, this was forgotten. So this is where he differs with Dr. Mishra. Dr. Mishra says that our national consciousness never got diluted. But Sitaramji says that if we had had this national consciousness of Bharatvarsha, we would probably have put in more efforts to recover Afghanistan and Seistan and Makran at the very beginning, and all that is bad that has happened to India has come from Afghanistan through the Khyber Pass, starting with Shakuni Mama in the Mahabharat. He came from Kandahar, and then the success that the Islamic invaders got is through the Khyber Pass. So long as they were trying to come through Sindh, they never succeeded significantly. So allowing Afghanistan to go, in my opinion, was a turning point. And all the more reason why we should, I'm digressing, all the more reason why we should put in efforts to take back Pakistan occupied Kashmir, because that is a channel for evil to enter into India. The third failure which Sitaramji talks about is mental. And this is something which is very relevant to us today, because few of us here, we are voices in the wilderness. We are just shouting, this is happening, that is happening. But most of the people are unconcerned. They don't feel anything wrong. If demography goes against us, anything wrong in Hindus getting converted, in the confusion of Hindus. So he says that at that time, there were Buddhist monks, there were Indian saints, and there were Indian merchants in as far places as Iran and Khorasan at the beginning of the Caliphate movement. He said that why did they not inform us about the storm that was being generated in the sands of Arabia? They should have come. And then he agrees that even if they had warned, were the Indian princes mentally prepared to heed that warning? So he also talks about the same sappers and miners of Dr. Mishra, that we have this Udar mentality. We allowed these Sufis to enter in before the invaders came, and the Arab traders were also plying their trade across India. So they were the people who used to give the information, because as I mentioned, that image that you have to see as you go back in time, there are no highways. It is not easy. There is no Google Maps for an invading army to enter into India to focus on a particular place. Unless they have spies inside the country, it is very difficult, because the whole terrain is jungle. You're moving from one human habitation to another. Your chances of meeting another human being is much less than the chances of meeting all kinds of animals. So now we come to his last part, that is the policies which were not pursued. The first need is a central point. Now, in India today, we have a central government. But so long as we have this word secular in our constitution, we remain an Abrahamic construct, because secularism is an Abrahamic construct. And today, if you see what is happening in Bengal to the Hindus, what is happening to the sadhus across India. I wonder whether we are worse. We are not worse off than you know. We are sitting in our air-conditioned rooms and criticizing the efforts of our ancestors who fought for 570 years. But what are we doing? With the central government, Sitaramji says, that when you have a central point to rally around, the Vijayanagar dynasty empire showed it, the Maharana Sangha of Mewar showed it, Shivaji Maharaj showed it, Banda Bahadur showed it, the Chandragupta, Vikramaditya and Skandagupta, all of them, they showed how a central authority, if it is too democratic and loosely, self-governing, then it doesn't work. And of course, the second thing that he talks about is forward policy, which also Dr. Mishra had spoken about, that we need to be aggressive. Even with Pakistan, all the aggression has been from Pakistan to us. It is only now that we have become unpredictable. We also go and strike them, and now they don't know what to do. So aggression is the best form of defense. If we only build fortresses like our ancestors did, someday they will succeed. They will find a technology like battering rams to break the walls of the fortress and enter. The third thing he says is reciprocity. It is good to talk about it. I don't know how far it would have been possible for them to do it. But Sitaramji says that what prevented our people to go into Makkah and attack Kaaba, give it back to them? Would they have dared to come again to India if we had done that? After all, that is also an idol, what they have in Mecca. So, to sum up, these are our stories of heroism, but also lessons that we need to learn, and possibly, in my opinion, we are not showing even an ounce of the heroism that our ancestors showed. So I don't know how much we are actually qualified to even criticize them when we ourselves are allowing sadhus to be killed and Hindus to be butchered in Bengal and Kerala, etc. But this is the end of my presentation, and I hope that we will have a vigorous discussion as usual, which we look forward to more than the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kiranji. Just one point on Adi Shankaracharya.
Yes.
People talk about Adi Shankaracharya preaching Advaita, but
yes.
he's the one who also established matas across the country.
No.
He organized the religion.
Yes. No.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you on that. And he also wrote Kanakadhara Stotram, which talks about acquiring wealth. He wrote about the Narsimha Stotram, which talk about aggression.
Yes, it is not black and white. It is not black and white.
Yeah, it is Vidyaranya who is inspiration for the Vijayanagar Empire. So
yes. Yeah. He and his brother Sayana, they were the inspiration for the Vijayanagar. I agree with that. But my point is that spirituality is full of paradoxes. You have a person like Jiddu Krishnamurti who says that there is no teacher, but he spends his whole life teaching. So it is full of paradoxes. Shankara talks of Advaita and he calls people to asceticism, but he writes the most beautiful devotional literature. Most beautiful.
Saundarya Lahari.
Yeah, most beautiful. But my point is, I'm not questioning the greatness of the man. If he had not been great, he would not have had that impact upon us, which is continuing to this date. I'm just tying in the time frame. He was born in 788. He probably died in the early part of the 9th century. And his message got amplified in the coming centuries. and the vitality of the Indian civilization got completely reduced. So what Sitaram Goelji says is that all these things, our military technology, everything is all right. But so long as you have the vitality and the wish to live life, as a nation, you will always find some way to overcome these things. But we never had the will to overcome it. This is what he says.
So I think one important point is that, see, it's always the supporters or the followers who are the problem. They will try to overdo. So what Shankaracharya spoke about, they will take only one side of it and will amplify it. This is the same problem Swami Vivekananda faced and is facing.
Yes.
So much. So he will understand the full thing. He will have a balance, but people will take one side and will just.
Arnab, that is why I quoted Shri Krishna in the Gita.
Yeah.
He tells Arjuna, the masses follow the leaders.
Exactly.
You are a leader. If you do things which confuse dharma, the whole population gets confused. Now the point is that Shankara's ideal is also allowed in Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma allows everything. But can that be the ideal for the whole country? Because the masses will never understand this. They cannot understand it, you see.
Right.
But they will follow it. They will see that our greatest leaders are going to the forest. They are abandoning their duties, leaving their family and going to, some ashram or hermitage.
This is a very important point that you made. That
is why I say, that is why I stress on the Vedas. In the Vedas, never they talk about Maya. They say Brahma Satya and stop. They do not add like Shankara did. Brahma Satya, Jagan Mithya. That he doesn't say.
No.
They don't.
See
Here we have to do it.
He is accused as a Buddhist in disguise.
No.
And it's supposed to have come to destroy Buddhism.
Dr. Coenraad has even said that the whole concept of moksha itself is not present in the original Vedas as per what the Buddhists have to say about the Vedas. Now, this statement.
Aditya,
this is Upanishadic. All these things is towards the end of Upanishadic.
Upanishad, I agree.
Yes.
And
the basis of Buddhism in Neti of Upanishads is also the Upanishads eventually.
Particularly some of the Upanishads like Mundaka Upanishad and all that, which
Mundaka Upanishad is a 12 slope wonder, right? So it's a 12 slope wonder that summarizes all of this.
Talks all that.
So another important point is, as you were saying, the mass will get confused. Not only that, the mass can
echo.
Okay. So the mass, my internet connection is unstable. So the mass can only follow one thing at a time.
Yes.
So there is a joke. There is a saying in English, right? That early to bed and early to rise makes you healthy, wealthy, and wise, right? So what I used to follow is only early to bed part. I cannot follow both the parts. I'm early to bed, I'm sleeping more. That's the problem.
See, the point is, Arnab, the point is that the entire population cannot have that spiritual experience. They only go through the outer motions. So it is very important what is the ideal we keep before society. And it is very important for us to remember that our roots are in the Vedas. And Aditya, with all my respect to Coenraad, one thing that I will not allow Coenraad ji to do is to interpret Vedas as a historical document. It is not a historical document. The worst offenders in this are Bhandakar Oriental Research Institute. They are the worst people because they are great scholars there, but they are dried out scholars who have no meaning in life left in them. Because you see, the Vedas, the Sanskrit of the Vedas is highly symbolic. It is an oral tradition. It is not a written tradition. So unless you are a rishi, you cannot understand the Vedas. As a historian, you should know your limits. Do not try to use the Vedas as a historical document. It is not a document at all. You can talk about the Upanishads to some extent because the Upanishads gives you some idea about life of society in those days. But Vedas, you have to be a rishi. It doesn't mean that you cannot be a rishi today. Even in the recent past, I don't know, Lakshmi, which part of Andhra is Jonalangadi, but do you know where is Bobili? Bobili?
Yeah, Vijayanagaram, the northeast.
So in Bobili, there was a very great person called Vashishta Ganapati Muni. And he was a great Saptavadani and all those things. So very recent times. He died only in 1930s.
Was he the same as Uma Ganapati
Yes,
Shastri?
Uma Sahasram. Yes,
The
Uma
Ramana Maharshi's Shishya?
Yes. First
he
disciple
composed
of Ramana
something
Maharshi.
and
Yes.
they together completed, I mean, Ramana Maharshi and
Yes,
Uma
yes.
Ganapati Ji together
You're right,
completed some shloka, I think.
You're right. So Vashishta Ganapati Muni has reinterpreted the Vedas in its original meaning, because the idea when you are a symbolic language, you have to use a key which is consistently applicable throughout the symbolism. So he has got the key, and if you are interested, you can go into his interpretation. But do not allow historians.
Something similar.
Do
Arvindo's
not allow
thing is also
historians to
symbolic.
interpret Vedas. Sorry, Vamsi.
No, Arvindo's symbolic version is also same.
Yes, 100%. Sri Aurobindo, although
Kapali
he was
Shastri.
Yes, Kapali Shastriyar was the disciple of Vashishta Ganapati Muni. And I belong to the same tradition of Vashishta Ganapati Muni, Kapali Shastriyar. That is my lineage. My Guru Parampara is that. But it is not for that I mentioned.
I would require your permission to give a very interesting thing which is not related to what Sitaramji said, but while we are on Ganapati Shastri, see, he has described the happenings to the human physiology during the time of Kundalini Jagrana. I think in terms of what onlookers say happens to the person who's undergoing Kundalini awakening. And if I remember right, I'd read the English rendition of those verses. It talked about the foramina sacrale, which is here, which is, I think, our
Kapala Moksha.
Yes,
Kapala
so
Moksha,
that opens.
Yes,
and I think so. If our Sahasrara Chakra is Shiva, and if the Kundalini energy coming up is Parvati, and their cosmic clasping union is what is the final completion of that, then the onlooker says he sees this open and he sees gases and light coming in and going out. Okay, I always felt that if that has to be symbolically shown, it would be a namam. So when Parvati and Shiva come together, maybe that is how it is depicted, and that is why the cracking open here is what is depicted as the U-shaped Gandha of Vishnu. I mean, this is not related to our discussion, but I think nobody could have brought this closer than Ganapati Shastri. And I had to mention it because it came to my mind. I'm so sorry for the change of topic.
You're always a source of information.
No, I've not read those shlokas again. I've lost them on my PC. I don't know what name I've saved that on.
The point is that before we talk about Ghar Vapsi and all that, there is a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of homework for Hindus to do. And the first thing that we have to understand is that if our spirituality doesn't make life more beautiful, then it is going to decrease the vitality of the nation.
Of course.
Our spirituality should be life accepting. Our goal should be the goal of Tantra, but our way may be the way of Vedanta. That is a different thing. But our goal should be to enjoy life in the right way. Here, Bhoga Aishwarya Prati.
Yes, we have been too virakta.
No. People like Gandhi have misled the nation.
Yes, they have.
With khadi and all, making a religion out of khadi and simple living. People are impoverished and you're talking to them about simple living. We have to aim for prosperity as a nation.
Money is one of the
psychologically, our connection with prosperity should be different, but that's a psychological connection.
Yes.
Externally, we should aim for prosperity.
Earning money is one of the Purusharthas, except that wealth should not be reduced to only the Dhana Lakshmi Varjan out of the Ashta Lakshmis, so to say. There are 7 more versions of Lakshmi which which await interpretation. Yes.
So I have not seen the chats. Is there anything that needs to be addressed? Is somebody?
So the chats, there have been lots of
Yes,
interesting points.
You have talked about the Apostle Thomas.
Yes.
Okay. I have worked in a Christian hospital for many
Yes.
years, and I think one of my pet projects is to disprove that Thomas ever came to India, because that is another superstition which being propagated.
That book is already written, no? The Myth of Saint Thomas.
I know it is already written, but it needs to be propagated.
In fact, since you have a connect, have a Garvapsi of Saint Paul's Cathedral back to Vedapuri Ishwar Mandir, if it is ever possible.
Saint Paul's Cathedral in Rome?
No. I'm talking Saint Paul's Cathedral of Puducherry.
Okay. That was a Shiva temple.
Yes, Vedapuri Ishwarana.
Yeah, it was a Shiva. Yeah.
Vedapuri Ishwara something.
In fact, there is no Tamilian here, but anybody who went to Tanjavur, and seen the Brihadishwara temple, I encourage you to go take next vacation, because it is magnificent. Built by the Cholas. So there is a depression about 12 kilometers away from the Gopuram, a place called Sarapallam. Pallam means depression in Tamil, and Saram means a framework. So what they used to do is they used to start a framework from a depression, make an incline towards the temple, and then carry the slabs on that incline to sequentially build the temple. So this particular temple that you are speaking of, I have not heard the name Saint Paul's. You are mentioning it. Here in Pondicherry, it is known as Semba Koil. Semba is another word for Shiva. So even locally, people call it Shiva Koil. So there is a place in Pondicherry about 5 to 6 kilometers away called Saram. So there is a collateral evidence that there was a very high tower here which has been destroyed, and there is anecdotal evidence that that tower was seen by fishermen as a way to find their way to the shore. It was quite high.
Yeah, there is some Tamil Christian person. I forgot his name. Joe was his first name. I forget that.
Yes, Joseph.
Joe. He writes it as Joe. Joe. Yeah. And he has said that even the convert fishermen of the coast of Tamil Nadu, they may be praying in church on land, but when they are venturing out to deeper sea for better fishing, despite converting to Christianity, they don't fail to invoke Muruga.
Yeah, there is a famous Catholic
Joe D. Cruz. Joe D. Cruz. D. Cruz,
yeah,
maybe.
Yeah,
Joe D. Cruz.
Yeah, his full name is Joseph. He has now shifted to Pondicherry. I don't know him personally, but he is a Catholic who has done Ghar Wapsi. And more specifically, he has become a Vaishnavite. He is a great scholar of the Sri Vaishnavite tradition. And he is invited by Tamilians to give discourses and all that.
We also have the Hawaii Islands Kauai thing where
Shiva Muni, Shiva, yeah.
In fact, the non-Pathshala kind of tradition of Shaiva thing is, I think, practiced only in Tamil Nadu and Sri Lanka. If someone could from the south give more information on this, it would be really rewarding. Because I think they are a forgotten tradition. Is that Shaiva Siddhanta or what is it?
My suggestion, Aditya ji, is that you can take up this project. You are well equipped to do it. We will all help. The idea is that history should be showing all the occurrences that happened during a particular frame of time.
Yes.
Not only the invasions, but the environment of India at the time of invasion and the pan-India environment. So, for example, if there is the Alwars in Tamil Nadu, or if it is Jnaneshwar in Maharashtra, so in that way, I don't think anybody has done it. There is a kind of history where you have to do research, you have to dig the ground and all that technical thing, inscriptions to be translated. But facts are already there. We just have to make the jigsaw puzzle. We have to put together the jigsaw puzzle and draw our conclusions from it.
Yes.
So I am particularly interested in the spiritual movements across India and how it contributed or diminished the vitality of the nation. And Arnab and Abhijit are great resource people for Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and all the devotional movements of Bengal. I am sure that different. I mean, our Lakshmi ji can talk a lot about. I hope about Karnataka and you were mentioning Sayana and his brother, no, Vidyaranya.
I think there is no greater figure than Swami Vidyaranya other than Samartha Ramdas Swami. There is no great figure than Swami Vidyaranya in the past millennium, so-called millennium. I mean, imagine he belongs to the Advaita Parampara of Adi Shankara. He becomes the Shrungeri Mathadhisha. If I'm not mistaken, Sayanacharya was his brother. Am I right?
His brother.
It was his brother. Now, he brings Harihar Raya and Bukkaraya back into Dharma.
Yes.
That too from Islam. Okay.
Yes.
Then
they escaped. They were forcibly captured. They escaped.
They escaped, but he brings them back and he gives the spiritual support required for, the adhisthana for this kind of re-vapasi. They establish a Hindu kingdom which becomes the magnificent Vijayanagara. But when he writes the Sarvadharma Sangraha, which I have not read, but just look at its Anukramanika, it may be from the Advaitic perspective. But he includes Jaina, Bauddha. I don't think he's included Ajivika because it must have merged away. But he includes Charvaka. He talks of all the schools prior to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is posterior to Swami Vidyaranya. He did not exist at that time. So he includes all of them, but he did not make the mistake that Gandhi made so many centuries later, where he called all them Sarva Dharma and said Sarva Dharma Samabhava. In Swami Vidyaranya's book, he is very clear that he will not give the status of a darshana to Islam. When he has encountered it at such a close encounter with Harihar and Bukkaraya doing Ghar Vapasi or whatever we call it. So if he would not have done that and if he would have included Islam as a darshana, you could have seen it would have become the most popular darshana within Sanatan Dharma and would have taken over from within. He did not make this mistake. And this mistake was committed by Gandhi so many centuries later. He gave Islam the status of being a dharma, Christianity the status of being a dharma, and then he put a samabhava over there. So in Sarvadarshana Sangraha, as an Advaitik, he has come from the parampara where they debated with Mimamsakas, they debated with Bauddhas, they debated with Jainas. But when it came to giving them their due respect for getting included in the Anukramanika of Sarvadarshana Sangraha, he took these names and he gave them their stand. And that is why Rajiv Verma ji has always said, I mean, this is open for all of us to discuss, the true meaning of Hindutva is understanding the Nasadiya Sukta because it connects these Astika and so-called no Astika schools of thought together with its questions and with its interpretation. And going back to that from what Savarkar wrote is the retracing back of, I would start with Savarkar, but I would include Chandranath Basu. I would include the teachings of Swami Samartha Ramdas, Swami Vidyaranya. I would include Devala Rushi, who wrote the Devala Smruti when we covered a chapter on Sindh. Qasim invading the Raja Dahir's kingdom, how they were all brought back by Devala Rushi. I would, of course, include people like Arya Chanakya. Adi Shankara is, of course, never to be left out. But eventually, we have to reach the Nasadiya Sukta. And if we go forwards from Savarkar, then in that case, we have to understand the colonized period, the colonial consciousness, the time when Savarkar himself wrote with all what he wrote. And the forward way from Savarkar would be Voice of India through Sitaram Goel and Ram Swarup. So in that sense,
take up this project, Aditya ji.
Yes, I would like
to take it up in earnest, and we will publish it under Voice of India Academy.
Right. So on that note, I think we need to announce a couple of things. First of all, is that such projects are very much welcome, and we'll be very happy to take it up as part of this Voice of India Academy. Now, some more announcements. First of all, so the next week is the last chapter of this by Vamsi. So we will finish this book, but this is just one book. So we need to take this up. So I invite suggestions from all of you, and not just suggestions, call for participations for the next book and for each chapter. So we will continue in this mode, possibly Sitaram Goel's books, because they are very nice resource, and we all get to read it by this way. So again, I will circulate a formal call for participation, but please do come forward and do this. So every
volunteer.
Volunteer. So we can cover maybe 1 chapter or 2 chapters or 3 chapters of a book per week. We will discuss that. That's number 1. That's actually number 2. The number 1 is, if you have any such projects like what Kiranji is suggesting Aditya ji to do, please do come forward. Third is, we will announce very shortly a seminar on the Malerkotla issue. So the Malerkotla issue, if you all recall, this was the latest district that was formed in Punjab to specifically make it a Muslim majority state. Now, Muslim majority district. So it's a very small district. What are the implications? Why was it done? What can happen and all those things. So we will have a seminar on the Malerkotla issue. And again, we will invite, we have some speakers, but we can invite other speakers to have this. That is number 3. Number 4 is that we have a library donation program. So what we want to do is that we want to donate books of Sitaram Goelji to different libraries. So this is absolutely free in the sense of no money is costing, but what is costing for the library is to ensure that there are readerships for it. They have to put it up and they have to ensure that these books are getting read. Now, Sitaram Goel's books, many of them are available online freely as PDFs, so etc. So how does it matter? It matters because libraries can still attract serious readership. So if somebody is serious, goes to the library, watches that this is the, the highlighted book in that library and starts reading it. So we have this library donation program. So if you know any local library who will be interested in this, please let us know. We'll be very happy to donate these books. So those were the 4 announcements, and we can continue the discussion, or we have 8:48, whichever way you want.
So on the library donation part, while a lot of readership is online these days, it also makes a statement when we place Voice of India books and Sitaram Goelji's books next to, let's say, Marxist literature. And if a public library can have Marxist literature, if a public library can have Islamic literature, why not Voice of India literature?
Yes.
So on my part, I spoke with the Southern India Regional Council of ICHR, the Indian Council for Historical Research, and I've agreed with the director that we will place Sitaram Goelji's entire set of works in a prominent place in their central library. Now, initially I thought that there will be some rejection, but they agreed. So I think if we can find some nice libraries like that, public libraries which have great readership, I think that will also make a statement.
One thing to say, yes.
I'll speak to the Vice Chancellor of Pondicherry University. Pondicherry University became a very notorious place some years ago when we had a Muslim Vice Chancellor appointed by the Congress, and he made it into a mini Pakistan. He started having Islam study center and stuff like that. He was appointing only Muslims, not only as staff in the university, but also examiners. He would call from, Srinagar, from Allahabad. He could not find any other examiners anywhere in India. So that is just by the way. We need to reverse that trend.
This is like Leela Sanson of Kalakshetra.
Yes. And we have to put these books physically, and it will make a statement, at least, if not.
Right. So this is just that there is no doubt in anybody's mind. This is physical copies. This is not PDF, ebook, nothing of that sort.
If possible, I would like to actually donate books. If it is financially possible for me in the near future, I would really like to do it. I can't commit to it.
A donor has already come up to do this donation.
Okay.
So we only need to identify. At the moment, each person who speaks is entitled to donate 1 set of books. So Aditya ji, you should volunteer, and then you will be entitled to donate 1 set of books.
I have one thing to say, sir. Yes,
he has put the money there.
Yes, I have one thing to say. As an academy, since all of us have diverse mother tongues,
Yes.
can't we get people to translate Voice of India books into regional languages of India? And I specifically mean languages other than Hindi.
Yes.
Right. So this is actually okay. On this note, I should say that this book has got translated into Bangla.
Okay.
And
which one?
So the voice.
Which one?
The current book.
The Heroic Hindu Resistance to. Okay. And who's the translator?
So the translator is actually my father.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
That's a great service.
And we are in the process. We are in the process of doing the second and third book. It's my side.
Please cultivate your next generation also, so that.
just one.
No. So let me complete. So the Voice of India, the publisher, he is very much willing to take this. And he says that all costs will be borne by him.
Aditya Goyal?
Yeah. Yes.
Is their address still at Ansari Lane, New Delhi?
Yes. Same.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is actually, he is very much interested in doing this. So if this is a very good point, if any one of you wants to do this, very, very welcome. Very, very welcome. Yeah.
One more thing. I think I should let Lakshmiji speak first.
I just want to point to Vamsi. Vamsi, I think yours is the concluding chapter. So feel free to add any other insights that you want to add, which doesn't form part of the book. Which is connected, but strictly doesn't form part of the book.
Right.
I can't hear you.
Kiranji did wonderfully today. Thank you, Kiranji. So bringing up this, connecting it with the other.
Vamsi, you're not audible.
Is my voice audible now?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I also started writing small gist of chapters in my mother tongue regarding this book, because I want to understand. For me, if I read in English, I know I take some time, but I take half of that time when I read in my mother tongue. So this current book, actually, I also started translating in bits and pieces in my mother tongue.
Telugu.
Excellent.
Very good. I have one more suggestion to give. I happen to come from the Savarkar background, and I know the baggage associated with that, but I am proud of my starting point. So my thoughts became clear when I started reading Savarkar, and they became far more clearer when I read Voice of India. So I came to Voice of India, and I kind of stumbled upon it, but I had read Savarkar before that, and before that I had read Vivekananda. So I found that there is a great clarity of thought in Savarkar, but he comes with the colonial consciousness baggage, which is present to some extent in his case. So I feel we can have one session on that book Hindutva before we move forwards and backwards. Is that it's not a Voice of India book, but I think that book too has been published by Voice of India. Something about Savarkar is published by Voice of India. Is that true? I mean, they send book lists from time to time. I'm not sure.
No, I think Savarkar is known for his clarity of thinking.
Yes.
But I'm not sure if any of his books are there in Voice of India.
Yeah, what's happened, Kiran sir, is I'm in touch with the people from Savarkar Smarak. I'm talking of the time of 1998 when I started reading Savarkar. So that was a good 23 years ago. Now, what's happened is his compositions are primarily either in English or in Marathi. Marathi is my mother tongue. But in the book Hindutva, he's used English, but he's interspersed it with dialogues from, with the verses from something which is Gurmukhi, something which is Marathi, something which is Audhi, and something which is Vraj, Kavi Bhushan and others. So that makes it more enriching because he brings up the Veera Rasa. Without the Veera Rasa, it becomes prosaic Virakta Bhava, So he brings that up, and I know how to, I feel that Veera Rasa, I would like to convey it to an audience. Now, the problem is when they did the translation, I think they've done a complete translation of Savarkar into Bangla also. But when they did the translations, they broke down this diversity of languages as quoted by Savarkar in Hindutva. We had a complete Marathi Hindutva, we had a complete Hindi Hindutva, we had a complete English Hindutva book. And then what was originally quoted from what Guru Gobind Singh wrote, what was originally quoted by what Shivaji wrote to a Rajput general of Aurangzeb, all these things of how the language came in is lost in that translation. So that original Hindutva book with all its different languages as quotes within the English text is now not available on sale anymore. I have got one copy in my place and I'm not going to give it to anyone for that reason. And that gives us the flair, that gives us the feel that he had to say. So before we move forwards and backwards from Savarkar, as I said, we have to retrace our journey back to Nasadya Sukta, and forwards we have to go to Voice of India. So if this book discussion is allowed as a webinar theme.
Right, we can take it up. In fact, there is a book by Ram Sarup ji on Hinduism by this Voice of India, which is also, I find there are, I mean, it also analyzes Hinduism and its different things.
Yes.
So, right. So we can take this up in the group. So so the group is quite active nowadays, which is a very, very good thing that I find. So we can take this up all in that WhatsApp group, saying which book to take up next and arguments and all of that.
One more suggestion, since we are multilingual here, writing books in a particular language, translating books into a particular language requires a book writer's expertise, which has to be cultivated and which can definitely emerge in a budding writer. But when it comes to translating smaller chats or smaller paragraphs, that is certainly possible for the speaker of any particular mother tongue. I have contact with groups which are, say, Bangla or from Jammu especially. I got a lot of contacts from there. I know what is happening there at the ground level on a daily basis. The problem is, if what has happened in Jammu is not understood by the rest of the country, they remain isolated, not just geographically, but in terms of a knowledge vacuum. I thought of an idea where what is happening in Jammu, what is happening in the post-poll violence of Bengal in contemporary context can be translated into regional languages and released as small write-ups for social media, whether it is WhatsApp, Facebook, anything else. And that way, what is happening inside Bengal should be known to people in the deep interior of Tamil Nadu, deep interior of Karnataka, deep interior of Nepal, deep interior of Assam. That is not being conveyed. What is happening is you have English and Hindi posts. Why shouldn't these reach the farmer? In this social media age, why shouldn't it reach the farmer? Why shouldn't it reach the regional language student who started using WhatsApp? And this is where if we don't do it, the Marxists, the leftists are going to do it. Propagandists of the Abrahamic Q are going to do it. So I want translations of topics other than Bengal to happen in Bengali. I want translations of topics of whatever issues are happening outside Maharashtra to also be conveyed in Marathi. And this can be done when we are all together. And that much of a translation capacity, I'm sure we can have, or we can create a small circle. Is that a good suggestion? Would you all be able to contribute? Because I see Telugu, Kannada people here. We also have speakers of Bangla. What can we do on this?
So the idea actually is to do very much what you just said.
Yes.
Have text translations, but we can also do 1 minute or 30-second videos.
Yes.
For example, rather than writing a lengthy, reading something quite lengthy on WhatsApp, 30 seconds video will do, because videos are quite popular.
Videos are popular. There is only a question of indemnification in case somebody decides to take something up. When it becomes a chat, of course, the police can trace anything. But if we are not writing something which is highly inflammatory but factual, and we give the original source, say somebody writes, and I'm not talking of something which is always controversial. There is a claim by the Jammu Dogras that Porus was Dogra, the proto-Dogra, the one who opposed Alexander. This may be contested by some other people. Leftists are sure to contest this point. But the Dogras say we are the people who have always stopped invaders. And why does the history of India not teach that Porus was a Dogra who countered Alexander and also defeated Alexander? So if they have some point to say with some proof, if this is written as a small chat and it is sent around, then when people study the age of Alexander, Buddha, Mahavira, then this topic can come up.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we won't
restrict ourselves to just
say or write anything that that is inflammatory or that goes against the law. But
we want Veera Rasa. We want Veera Rasa.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. There's no backing out when it comes to putting the facts forward. I used to do that on social media long ago. I just stopped recently. But absolutely, I mean, I don't even care about my employer when it comes to that, because we have all those corporate rules. I don't care. It's banned to speak religion in my company, but I speak religion. But yeah,
If I'm not mistaken,
Unstoppable.
I think even Sitaram Goel's book called Holy Terror, I think, no, on Islam, it has been banned.
No, I think it was, I don't know if it was
Quranic
Ram Swarup's
edition,
book,
yes,
Islam according to the Hadith or some book like that.
Not Sitaram's book.
Right. No, Sitaram's books, this Calcutta
Calcutta Quran petition. Yes, yes.
That got into a lot of
Understanding
trouble.
Islam according to
Right.
the Hadith was also banned. I think that's Ram Swarupji's.
Probably, I'm not sure. But Calcutta Quran petition was planned to be banned, and then of course they could not stand up to.
No, but most of these bans, especially the ban under Section 292A, is by Muslims. Even the section was brought in by Muslim pressure. There was no section to ban books in India prior to that.
You see, the interesting thing is, the interesting thing about these Muslim groups is the same Muslim group. You take the Deoband school in India, they have made a public announcement that if we remove secularism from the Constitution of India, they will come out on the streets. Whereas the same Muslim school in Pakistan, if they say that if you bring in secularism, we will go on the streets. You see, the same school. It's not a different school. The Deoband school of Islam.
So to put it in J. Sai Deepak's words, there is an ideology which is a software. Its choice of methodology right now could be a different strategy here and there. Their ideology remains a software which is animating them. They use constitutional methods, they use anti-constitutional methods, they use extra constitutional methods, and we use only constitutional methods. And those two not fully. This is a problem.
I think we should also exercise ourselves on how best means we can adopt to make India a Hindu Rashtra.
Yes.
So there is a great opposition at the constitutional level.
Yes, just to make a small tweaking of the statement. Yeah, just a small tweaking of the statement. We don't have to make India a Hindu Rashtra. We already are a Hindu Rashtra. Yes. We have to make it a Hindu Rajya. Rajya. And this was brought to a notice by Radha Rajan Iyengar from Besant Nagar, Chennai. She said we don't have to create a Hindu Rashtra because it exists. We need a Hindu Rajya.
In name, but we are secular by constitution, you see.
So that has to be changed to a Hindu Rajya. Yeah. The goal of our activism politically is to change us from a secular Rajya to a Hindu Rajya.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
So, right.
Arnab steps in.
No, but it is time. It is time.
Yeah. So, so Kiranji, great presentation.
Thank you.
You explained this.
That horses point so was the one I liked the most. The horses.
No, right. Plus, you brought about Sitaram Goel's interpretation, not just the original book. So fantastic. And we will look to one more fantastic presentation from Vamsi next week on the 6th chapter. And as I said, all the members here, I request all of you to please keep thinking and please participate for the next book, the Malayat Kotla seminar, the library book program, and for any such research on some specific things. So this is all what we want to do as the Voice of India Academy. It's not just to have some talks. No, we have to do this. We have to cultivate this. Okay. So on that note, maybe we can finish today.
Thank you. Good night.
Vamsi. Yes,
Vamsi.
Yeah, only one point. Like it is in agreement with whatever Kiranji has told. In Ramayana, that Veera Rasa that Aditya ji was saying, and the prosperity, and including all the masses, like when a leader goes in a way that the masses follow. Everything is very well documented. Like the movement of the travel of Shatrughna from Ayodhya to the place where Rama was staying to bring him back. It is laden with so many examples that whole of the cities actually move, new cities get built, artisans are mobilized, so many things happen. Like and I was very surprised to see in one of the sargas that Jabali was propagating Nastikatva. The subsequent chapter where Rama was actually demolishing that with Astikatva, that the real essence of Vedas. So initially when I started reading Ramayana, I left from my mind that okay, Rama was a god, but the more I am reading and into this study of Ramayana, I am seeing more as a human and why he became a god. And all the points that Kiranji was highlighting in his speech and the ideas of Sitaram Goyalji, very, very evidently, every aspect that we think of how a nation can be. And Rama was also saying that you have to kill enemies. We always see that, okay, don't kill enemies and all those things. Everything was apt. So this is one project actually I was planning to start after much more major part of Ramayana when it gets covered, to see like how the political situation or what I did a different angle rather than that, rather than a mere what should I say, a grantha wherein you can only derive spiritual strength.
Vamsi, this will be your platform whenever you are ready.
Yeah, sure.
He should give a presentation on the Ramayana. I mean,
No,
Ram is so much to me.
Not just one presentation.
Yes, a series. We must. And at Vanavasa Parva, where after Bharata Bheta, after meeting Bharata, and before the Sita Apaharana, that period is the most important because we forget that Chhattisgarh is described there, Vidarbha is described there, the Satpuras are described there, and the sacred geography associated with that is to my mind. And you mentioned the journey of Bharata away from Ayodhya to Kekaya and back to Ayodhya. So he must have crossed the Sindhu. Kekaya must be the other side, maybe.
All right. So
absolutely great discussion as always.
Right. So thank you all. Thank you, Kiranji. Fantastic presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Kiranji. Namaste.